What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History Channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. 15 facts about Vincent van Gogh's cruel and tortured life. Vincent van Gogh's life was marked by poverty, loneliness, rejection, and mental illness, despite the fact that it led to some of the most remarkable works of art ever created. The fact that Vincent van Gogh's paintings would eventually become the most sought-after and expensive status symbols in the art world is an irony that is almost too cruel to comprehend. The biography of Vincent van Gogh is sad enough on its own. The idea that even a single Van Gogh would today fetch hundreds of millions of dollars would seem inconceivable to someone who frequently had to choose between purchasing canvas and paint or food. Nevertheless, considering these sad and bizarre facts about Vincent van Gogh, it is only fitting in light of his life. Vincent van Gogh was a failure in just about everything he attempted in his abbreviated life. However, over a 10-year period, he produced over 2,000 works of art and 900 paintings, mostly ignored, battling his own inner demons, and surviving through the intervention and kindness of a sibling. His major flaw was possessing an artistic genius and vision that were way ahead of its time. His life's sacrifice is a body of work that today elicits a cult-like fascination with both his paintings and his tortured and strange existence. In an effort to regain a friend, he severed his earlobe. In the summer of 1888, Vincent van Gogh left the city of Paris and headed to the Provence region of France. He eventually settled in the ancient town of Arles, supported financially by his art dealer brother Theo. There, he rented a large yellow house and began to dream of setting up an artist colony where he and other artists with similar interests could live and work. Paul Gauguin, another cutting-edge impressionist who both men professionally admired, was someone Theo and Vincent knew. It took some persuasion, but in October of 1888, Gauguin agreed to move to the Yellow House, and initially the two artists functioned reasonably well together. Gauguin was a streetwise, former stock exchange worker, and Van Gogh was a troubled and talented young man. Unfortunately, the acerbic and condescending Gauguin and the sensitive, needy Vincent van Gogh quickly began to get on each other's nerves. What little money they had was consumed by drinking and visits to nearby brothels. Van Gogh eventually descended into drunken agitation and hostility, sensing correctly that Gauguin was preparing to abandon him and their artistic colony. According to Gauguin, on December 23, after another savage argument, he moved out and checked into a hotel when Van Gogh threatened him with a knife. Supposedly, Van Gogh sliced off much of his left earlobe, walked to a familiar brothel and presented the bloody appendage to a prostitute named Rachel, who fainted on the spot. Because Gauguin's self-serving account is the only perspective that remains, speculation continues around what exactly happened and who exactly cut off Van Gogh's ear. A recent theory is that Gauguin, an accomplished fencer, actually lopped off the ear during the pair's final argument. Whatever the case, Van Gogh evaded police on the night of the 23rd, but, because they knew of his eccentric identity, they eventually made it to the Yellow House, where they discovered him in his blood-soaked bed. Van Gogh was taken to the hospital and eventually committed himself to a mental asylum. Gauguin noticed the police activity when he returned and left Arles on Christmas Day, informing Theo of his brother's condition while en route to Paris. Although the two artists would never see each other again, they would continue to correspond. With his typical arrogance, within weeks, Gauguin sent Van Gogh a letter requesting that Vincent give him back paintings that he had previously gifted. He only sold one painting during his lifetime. In 1889, Vincent van Gogh was invited to exhibit at Les XX, an annual art show in Brussels sponsored by 20 local artists who displayed their own work as well as the work of 20 invitees. Vincent submitted 3 landscapes, 2 sunflower studies and a painting, titled The Red Vineyard. Anna Bach, the sister of a friend of Van Gogh, Eugene Bach, paid 400 francs for the painting, about $80 in 1890. Because Van Gogh's work was greeted by many in the art community with derision, Anna wished to encourage him with the purchase. Although Van Gogh may have sold some drawings and works unofficially, this is the only publicly recorded sale that occurred in his lifetime. Today, the Red Vineyard hangs in the Pushkin Museum in Moscow, having been nationalized from a Russian collector after the revolution. His most famous work was painted while he was in an asylum. After a psychotic breakdown, Van Gogh voluntarily committed himself to the St. Paul Asylum in St. Remy de Provence in May of 1889. Although he was not allowed to paint in his actual bedroom, he was granted studio space in another room. Many of the paintings that he continued to turn out during this prolific period were merely landscapes of the view from his asylum room, minus the bars. For what is considered to be his most famous painting, The Starry Night, he was allowed to sketch a nightscape, which he then transformed during the day. The swirling skies and aura around the stars have been interpreted as everything from the symbolism of infinity to the hallucinations resulting from Van Gogh's mental illness. Van Gogh thought so little of The Starry Night that he withheld it from the batches of paintings he routinely sent to his brother to sell in Paris because he wanted to save money on postage. Of the painting he commented in a letter, "I have been slaving away on nature the whole year, hardly thinking of impressionism or of this, that and the other. And yet, once again I let myself go reaching for stars that are too big, a new failure, and I have had enough of it." His brother was his unwavering supporter. Without Theo van Gogh, there would have never been the artist Vincent van Gogh. Initially, when they were employed by the same art dealer, it was Theo who encouraged his brother to pursue art as a vocation. Because his instability and even mental illness made him virtually unemployable, most of Vincent's financial support came from Theo. Theo van Gogh was also a strong proponent of Impressionist art and artists when this school of painting was still relatively undiscovered. Vincent van Gogh lived with Theo in Paris from 1886 until 1888, and through Theo's business contacts, he met some of the most prominent artists of the time period, including Toulouse-Lautrec, Pissarro, Seurat, Cezanne, and the aforementioned Gauguin. Theo and Vincent's remarkable relationship and Theo's unflagging encouragement and emotional support are chronicled in the numerous letters that they exchanged. Fortunately, these letters were preserved and reprinted in the 20th century. During his lifetime, Theo was discussing his brother with another artist friend and commented, "I should not be surprised if my brother were one of the great geniuses and will one day be compared to someone like Beethoven." Time proved Theo correct. One of his final paintings depicts the field where he committed suicide. In the 3 months of his tenure at Auvers-sur-Oise, Vincent van Gogh composed 70 paintings, many of them his most famous works. On July 27, 1890, Van Gogh made his way to the wheat fields just north of his residence at an inn in Auvers-sur-Oise. He had borrowed a pistol from his innkeeper, ostensibly to scare off crows while he was painting. Instead, he is believed to have turned the gun on himself. Wheatfield with Crows, an abstract work filled with black crows, paths that lead nowhere, and ominous skies, is coincidentally one of Van Gogh's final works. It depicts the field where Van Gogh attempted to kill himself. He would stumble back to his inn after injuring himself in the chest, deny what he had done, and pass away 30 hours later with his brother Theo by his side. The cemetery that Vincent and Theo are buried in is only a few hundred feet from this vantage point. A postcard offers clues to a hillside Van Gogh might have painted in his final hours. Tree Roots, Van Gogh's unfinished painting of tree trunks and roots on a hillside, was probably his last work. It was probably painted on the day he died, July 29, 1890, in the French village of Auvers-sur-Oise. Art historians who examined a postcard of the area announced in July 2020 that they think they found the exact spot depicted in the painting. Wouter van der Veen, the scientific director of the Institute Van Gogh in Auvers-sur-Oise, found the postcard, which was dated around 1905, in a collection of postcards that someone had borrowed. Researchers, after studying tree roots, the postcard, and the hillside in its current state, said they believe the postcard site, next to a road, was the spot in the painting. Van Gogh Museum researcher Theo Miedendorp said the hillside was about 492 feet from the Auberge Revue, the inn where Van Gogh spent his final days, so the artist probably walked past it many times. Dominique Charles Janssens, owner of the Institute Van Gogh, said that 45 to 50% of the growth is still in place. The overgrowth on the postcard shows very clear similarities to the shape of the roots on Van Gogh's painting, Miedendorp said. That this is his last artwork renders it all the more exceptional, and even dramatic. His therapist made off with millions of dollars worth of Van Gogh's art when he died. The small French town of Auvers-sur-Oise, which is 20 miles from Paris, was where Vincent van Gogh spent the last 90 days of his life, because of a doctor named Paul Gaucher who lived there. His brother Theo sent him to Auvers on the advice of other artists. Dr. Gaucher was a physician and devotee of homeopathic medicine, and Theo was hoping that he could help his brother achieve some semblance of stability and happiness. Gaucher was also an artist and art collector who traded his services for paintings from the likes of Cézanne, Renoir, and Van Gogh, who famously painted his portrait. Unfortunately, although he became quite friendly with Van Gogh in his last days, Gaucher was unable to prevent his suicide in July of 1890. Theo van Gogh invited the small group of mourners back to Vincent's lodgings after Van Gogh's funeral, where he was buried in the town cemetery in Auvers. He suggested that each person bring a painting to honor his brother. Paul Gaucher and his son gathered as many paintings as they could carry when it was their turn. The majority of these works, which now make up the majority of the Van Gogh exhibit at the Musée d'Orsay, were donated to the Louvre by Gaucher's son, who kept some of them privately for many years. He only had one romantic relationship in his entire life. Vincent van Gogh was not so reclusive and socially inept that he didn't attempt to romance and even marry female acquaintances that he encountered. While living in England in his early 20s, he was rebuffed by the daughter of a landlady who was engaged to another man. His first cousin also famously rejected him by saying, "No, nay, never." He showed up in Amsterdam to continue the search, making it sound like a stalker from the 19th century. His cousin wouldn't even let him see her. In 1882, in The Hague to study drawing with a friend, Van Gogh made the acquaintance of a seamstress and prostitute named Clesina Maria Hornink. Hornink had a 5-year-old daughter and was expecting a child fathered by a man who had abandoned her. She would eventually move in with Van Gogh, the only domestic relationship he ever had. Although he told Theo he wanted to marry the woman, after his apoplectic pastor father demanded he end the relationship, and his brother sensibly advised the same, Vincent eventually left Clesina Hornink, but not before she gave Vincent a dose of gonorrhea. After that, she gave her children to family members to raise, and in 1904, she took her own life by throwing herself into a Rotterdam canal. Some historians have attempted to connect her son's paternity to Vincent, but it is pretty clear that the dates don't match up. Suicide and mental illness were common among the Van Gogh family. There were 6 children born to Vincent van Gogh's parents, 3 boys and 3 girls. Of these 6, Vincent struggled with mental illness for his entire adult life and ended it in suicide. The circumstances surrounding Theo van Gogh's death are still a mystery to historians, but they may have been connected to syphilis, suicide, or mental illness. The third brother, Cornelius, was 14 years younger than Vincent and lived in South Africa. After his marriage disintegrated, he enlisted during the Boer-British conflict, was captured, and committed suicide at 33. Wilhelmina van Gogh would spend the last 4 decades of her life in a mental institution, suffering from conditions that were similar to Vincent's maladies. The Nazis declared him a degenerate. Vincent van Gogh was one of many artists that the Nazis declared degenerate. Not content to merely remove certain paintings and artists from the state's museums, they went so far as to organize auctions to sell off such artwork en masse. One of the works caught up in this process was a self-portrait by Van Gogh that is among his most famous works. Not only is the jade background a striking color, but the almost oblong skull of Van Gogh also makes the painting an unusual rendition and an unmistakable image. But the painting really stands out because of its historical context. The painting is officially called Self-Portrait dedicated to Paul Gauguin. Van Gogh painted it in 1888, inscribed it "A mon ami Paul," and sent it to Gauguin at the artist's home in Brittany, in the hope it would induce him to come to the proposed artists' colony in Alls. Despite their falling out, Gauguin must have liked the painting because he kept it until 1897 when, attempting to raise money for one of his Polynesian excursions, he pawned it to a Parisian art dealer who subsequently sold it for 300 francs. Thinking that the inscription would lessen the sales price, someone, probably Gauguin, obscured the dedication, which is still faintly visible in the upper portion of the painting. When the painting was auctioned off in Lucerne in 1939, it went for £12,000, a surprisingly high price. Purchased by banker Maurice Wertheim upon his death, it was bequeathed to Harvard University, where it hangs in the Fogg Art Museum. For 40 francs, Van Gogh's final innkeeper sold his 2 paintings. Arthur Revaux was the innkeeper who housed Vincent van Gogh at the Auberge Revaux for the last 3 months of the artist's life. His family got to know the artist, who took his meals with them and whose absence at dinner on the day he attempted suicide indicated something was seriously wrong. Arthur Revaux refused to buy any more paintings from Theo after Van Gogh died because he didn't want to come across as arrogant. The only pieces he did have were a portrait of his daughter Adeline and a landscape of the Auvergne town hall, which Van Gogh painted from the street in front of the inn. Both paintings were displayed in the Auberge until the Revaux family moved to the town of Moulins and operated a café there. In 1905, 2 American artists staying in Moulins heard that Arthur Revaux had 2 Van Goghs and asked to see them. When they mentioned that the paint was already deteriorating and he should give the artworks to them to be preserved properly, Revaux demanded that he be paid something despite his belief that the paintings were virtually worthless. They quickly settled on a price. 40 francs, about $10 American. Van Gogh was a failure as an evangelist, among other things. In 1879, Van Gogh, wishing to emulate his father who was a church pastor, was able to secure a position as an evangelical missionary in the Borinage, a poor mining region in Belgium. One of Van Gogh's criticisms of theology, which he studied, was that it was merely words and not actions. To better commune with the members of his impoverished community, Van Gogh gave away his clothing and allowed a homeless person to assume his lodgings while he slept in a crude hut. His fervent attitude did not endear him to church officials, who declined to rehire him when his 6-month contract expired. Van Gogh also spent his spare time composing drawings, but most of these early works have disappeared. His sister-in-law contributed to Van Gogh's popularity. Johanna Jo van Gogh-Bonger was born in Amsterdam in 1862. She was introduced by her brother to Theo van Gogh, who immediately proposed, a proposal that was eventually accepted in 1889. In fact, her marriage and subsequent delivery of a son may have been the main factors in Vincent's decision to commit suicide, believing that Theo, with a growing family, would soon be unable to support him. Jo van Gogh was given the task of making something of the then worthless artistic legacy and collection of Theo and Vincent's letters after Theo passed away shortly after Vincent. Through her promotion of Vincent's work with prominent art dealers and her publication of letters to Theo, a public fascination with the work and life of Vincent van Gogh began, a fascination that has never subsided. After she passed away, her son Vincent Willem, who was named after his famous uncle, carried on her work and established the foundation that is in charge of the Amsterdam Vincent van Gogh Museum. Vincent's death sent his brother into a downward spiral. Following the death of Vincent, Theo van Gogh seems to have gone into a profoundly negative health spiral. By November of 1890, he was a patient at a psychiatric hospital near Utrecht, Holland, having left Paris to be hospitalized near family members. He died in hospital on January 25, 1891, aged 33. His death has been attributed to many factors, including syphilis-induced dementia, suicide, and severe depression over his brother's death. Whatever the specific cause, Theo's condition was deemed serious enough to confine him to a mental institution. Recognizing the remarkable bond between Vincent and Theo, Theo's widow had Theo's remains exhumed and reburied at the Auvergne cemetery next to Vincent. At one time, a Van Gogh was the most expensive painting in the world. In 1990, one of the 2 Van Gogh portrait of Dr. The Kramarski family, the owners of the Gachet paintings, removed them for auction. The painting was one of several Van Goghs owned by banker Siegfried Kramarski, who died in 1961. When the Nazi government ordered the painting from a Frankfurt art museum to be sold, Kramarski bought it. The subsequent May 15, 1990 Christie's auction caused a sensation in the art world when a Japanese industrialist, Ryoi Saito, bid $82.5 million, way over the expected $40 million and a record price. A day later, Saito bought a Renoir for $78.1 million. Saito also irritated many by placing the painting in his private office and declaring that, upon his death, he would be cremated clutching the portrait in his arms. Subsequently, Saito experienced severe financial difficulties, and the painting was reportedly sold. Its whereabouts are unknown. The Van Gogh record price would stand until May 2004 when it was broken by Picasso's Boy with a Pipe, which sold for $93 million.